our YouTube channel through Aggie Horticulture A&R. All right. Well, I thought we'd lead off a little bit. Skip, do you have a topic that you think that our clients would benefit from today?
Yes, I do. So I'm getting a lot of calls on plants that are suffering from a lack of moisture in the plant. And I say in the plant, and I'll explain why in just a moment. That would be roses that the old leaves are firing, that is getting a brown sections, collapse of veins, and the yellowing and browning of the leaves. Trees and shrubs, including crepe myrtles and lots of different things where the tips and margins of the leaves are burning back. Eventually the whole leaf is turning brown. In Bryan College Station, we have high sodic water, so that creates a problem. And any foliage that's within the spray of the mist that rises up from irrigation sprinklers is getting burned just because of our sodium and bicarbonates in the water. But overall, it's just a lack of moisture in the plant. And I have not, one of the things that can cause it, which I've yet to identify with a particular case, is excessive fertilizer applications of a salt-based synthetic fertilizer. Those fertilizers can be very effective, but when you put a lot of salts of any type into a plant's root zone, it can cause problems, especially when their demands are too high. Another thing that we're seeing is with new transplants. When I say new, I mean in the last 6 to 12 months almost. When you put a plant in the ground, the whole root system is in that cylinder that you pulled out of the pot. And in the garden center, prior to you bringing it home and planting it, it was getting watered every day or twice a day to keep that huge top supplied by that very confined root system, extremely unnaturally confined root system. So when you put that in the ground, even if your soil is moist, it takes time for soil moisture to wick into that root cylinder. And on a hot day, it way over pumps the water out that was there, and it becomes dry and it becomes drought stressed. So the key, that's why we say plant in the fall and winter, because that's the easy time. It gives them time to establish. But in the summertime, the key is, can I keep that cylinder moist without keeping it soggy? A lot of Gulf Coast soils are high clay, including those in the Bryan College Station area. And so your little hole becomes an underground bathtub, and it's really easy to oversaturate it and to keep it such that the roots cannot get oxygen. And if you think overwatering is bad, well, there's no time that's worse to overwater than the summer, because the demands are highest that they can be on that plant. If you've got to overwater, do it in the late fall or winter, which is not good then either. But you see what I'm saying? The demands aren't so high. So that plant is pumping so fast. In most cases with plants, they can't pump fast enough. That's why your tomatoes wilt during the day and bounce back up in the evening. We have other plants, including the turf, that can do that and bounce back. It's just because it can't pump it fast enough. So add over soggy wet soil to that, and you've got a recipe for a really rapid decline and death. So that if your plant has been in for a while, so let's say since midwinter or last fall, you should be watering a larger area. I like to use a berm of soil around the plant, and that way you can fill it with water, and you know all that water goes straight down, because otherwise if you used a hose, it's puddling and the water's running off, and then you think you've soaked it, but when you go dig down, you've wet it about a half inch or an inch deep at the most. And so I like to use a berm. There are tree watering bags that you can buy and use around new trees that drip all the water you put in them right down into that area. There's a little device called the tree hugger sprinkler that works really well. You can turn it on to water a small area, or you can turn it higher and water a bigger and bigger area. It kind of goes around the tree like this. But however you go about it, it is not important. The important thing is you keep the soil adequately moist, knowing that the amount of volume it's needing is high. But most people think they have to water a lot more, and what that does is the oversaturation, which I'm seeing a lot of problems, and there will be problems that follow with root rot because of that as well.
Let's try connecting through the Wi-Fi.
That's really great information and a very good point, Skip. I wanted to know if any of my colleagues have any comments or observations you wanted to lend as well. I see we're joined by David Oates as well from, is it Jefferson County? I can't remember. Oh, score. And David, have you been noticing the same thing in your area, at least with residents you've been talking to, issues with oversaturation from overcompensating for the drought conditions we're undergoing, or high heat in the summer?
The biggest issue that I have seen, can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. The biggest issue that I've seen is in oversaturation would be the set it and get it mentality on the automatic sprinklers. Our homeowners, when you ask them how to water, the biggest thing that we see, and especially with lawn grasses, is they don't know how much water is being put out, but it's actually in minutes. And well, I'm watering 15, 20 minutes, every day, every other day. And yes, we are running into a couple of issues very sporadically with things like that. But the biggest issue that we face, like I said, is just not setting it correctly. And again, we have had a couple of issues where it is too much water, even during this dry period. So that's what we need to look at, is if you are using an automatic sprinkler system, is to know how much that water system puts out, easily rectified by doing what I call the catch can test. They make little measuring cups, or even my method, the tuna fish can, space them out and see how much water is being put out on a particular area. But yeah, that's the biggest thing that we have seen, is just set it and forget it type situations where it is being watered every day, or maybe a malfunction in the sprinkler system. So it is important to check your sprinkler systems and make sure that they are putting out what's needed in that issue. So that's really what we're seeing as far as saturation, things like that.
Excellent. Now, part of landscaping, I remember we've been talking as far as our colleagues have been talking to our residents about paying attention to cycle and soak. A time period where we should be watering, allowing the water to actually penetrate soil and get down to those plants as well. Could you please explain that a little bit? Well,
Okay, is that Skip? Were you going to jump in, or I don't mind?
One of y'all can. I can wait.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll chime in, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, so cycle and soak, the idea is, how do you get water in the soil? Extension agents often say, well, your lawn needs an inch of water a week. Well, that's during the hot season, not the fall and spring, and definitely not the winter, that it needs that much. But cycle and soak, you can't put an inch of water down at one time on a lawn without it running off, unless it's just the coarsest of all sands. And so what we do is we water for as long as we can until it starts to run off, or it's about to start to run off, and then have the system go off, sit for 45 minutes or an hour, however long it needs to for your soil type, and then have it come on again and do another cycle and then another soak until you've applied that and gotten the good deep soaking. I get a lot of calls that are people watering every day, people watering every other day, and all that does is either wet the soil very, very shallowly or create a swamp if you put more water on, and neither is good. It also promotes diseases and things. So the cycle and soak, if you can wean your lawn to once a week, that would be ideal. Now, I know for a lot of people, they just cannot bear to water less than twice a week, which I'll give you twice a week if you need to. But I have, last week, I watered my lawn for the first time this summer. So think about that a minute. That is a good deep-rooted grass plant that's been weaned to tolerate that. I allowed it some stress. I didn't, try to just keep it from ever having any stress. But the point is not that none of you should have watered before last week. It's just to say that our lawns can go longer than we think. And with cycle and soak, we can achieve that. And the reason I like that so much is, think about a cross section of your soil in your lawn. If you fill that with water, you soak it so that it's full of water, what happens in the next day, 2 days, 3 days? Well, the water level in between the soil particles starts to go down with gravity. Just like if you drink Coke out of a straw, when you let go with your mouth, the Coke falls down in the straw and air moves in behind it. Well, that's happening in your soil line as that water level comes down. So that's bringing oxygen back into the root system. And then at some point you refill it again. And so that cycle of giving it a soaking and letting it dry out is good for your lawn. That little daily wet, here's another thing to think about. You get use out of the last part of your watering cycle, not the first part. The first part wets the leaves of the grass, it wets the thatch, and it starts to wet the surface of the soil, and then the sprinkler goes off. And what happens to all that water? Well, unfortunately, we don't have gnomes and fairies with squeegees to get the water off the leaves of the grass and into the soil. So it just evaporates away and contributes to Southeast Texas humidity. Thank you very much, by the way. And instead, once that's wet, that later part of the cycle is having water run down in your soil. That's where your drinking water you paid for is actually getting into the bank account. So a squirt every day. I think I've made my point.
Thank you very much, Skip.
We always like to use the term with my homeowners, and I have to always explain it to them, but we use the term when watering is when you water deeply and infrequently, you're doing more justice for the lawn. So, you know, back to what Skip just said, we're watering shallow every day and kind of, I call it sprinkling the water. Basically, Skip, you hit it right on the head. You're doing no good. You're losing a lot of it, number one, to evaporation, and it's not getting down deep enough. So we always encourage our homeowners, whether it be lawn grass or even, you know, established plantings, to water deeply and infrequently. And like I said, that's exactly what the term means. And it's kind of a misnomer when you tell homeowners, hey, you need to water deeply and infrequently, and then you go back and explain, you know, just like what you went through as to, you know, how the water cycle goes up and down in the soil. It's very important to think about things like that. So that's just a good rule of thumb that I always, you know, tell my homeowners, is to water deeply and infrequently when possible. So.
That's definitely excellent advice. Folks, for y'all out there, you can participate. You can always type in questions that you might have into the chat box. For those of you who this may be your first time using Teams, there should be a bar with a little bubble, a little word balloon that you can click onto and then ask any questions that you might have, and we'll address them as we get to them. As a matter of fact, we have a person named Kimmy who just posted a question. She says she recently started watering her lawn about 2 to 3 weeks ago, every 3 days or so. With the heat the way it has been, is every 3 days too often? And I think we did pretty much address that in our discussion. And then Sherry posts, how do you deal with spent tomato plants? Well, I personally, I will compost them. Sherry, we're out of production time for tomatoes. As a matter of fact, we can start tomatoes by seed in about another month for a fall harvest. So if you're looking forward to tomato production, we're at the end of it at this time. We always put our hands over our hearts and say goodbye to those tomatoes. But we look forward to a fall. You can be very, very successful with fall planting for tomatoes. So sorry to bear the bad news, Sherry, but I'd say just go ahead and compost them. Another one of our colleagues had brought up a topic which I think is really important as well. And I'd ask Kimberly if you could talk a little bit about hurricane preparation. What are y'all doing in the county?
Sure, absolutely. I was fortunate enough to be able to speak at our local county hurricane expo a couple weeks ago, and shared a couple things with the county, with the followers there. And I'd like to take a minute or two and just talk about some of the things that I shared with them. Preparation obviously is key. Even long before hurricane season starts, it's important to be prepared. I'm sure most of us on here have gone through a hurricane before, and preparation is key. So whether you live on the Gulf Coast like we do, there are a couple things that that you can do to prepare your lawn. The first one is to check out your trees and make sure that you know, those hurricane force winds are 74 miles per hour or greater, and they can often cause branches to fall, to break, and that can be very dangerous and cause some damage. And so it's important to check out your trees, remove any damaged or dead limbs throughout your property. And what I did point out to the speakers, or to the listeners at that last speech, was that you know, if you trim all of these trees and branches and so forth, make sure that you don't leave them around to become projectiles in this, you know, that 74 mile an hour wind. So trim those and then get them out of the way so they don't become projectiles. You also want to make sure that those trees aren't rubbing along your shingles, your roof line, things like that. And so being able to check out your trees and make sure that they are not going to cause too much damage is a great point. Another kind of common sense type thing is to secure and clean your gutters. Obviously, we'll get lots of rain from a hurricane, so it's important that your gutters are clear and free of debris. A question that I've received and have talked about before on this topic is there anything I can do to protect my mulch? And unfortunately, unless any of my colleagues have a super great idea, most of your mulch will probably wash away during a hurricane. You can use, you know, those rubber borders to kind of hold the mulch in place. But most likely your mulch might just wash away, and you should expect to replace it during a really large storm. Also, during the threat of a storm, it makes sense to avoid fertilizing. There's no real need to fertilize your lawn or plants because it will just get washed away and find its way into our water system and contaminate that. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention was try and get your lawn mowed. A tidy and trim lawn will drain water a whole lot easier, and it'll be easier to clean up after debris. And because of all the rain, possible debris and things like that, it may be several days or a week before you're able to get your lawn mowed. So do that ahead of time if possible. And then a lot of us have container plants, patio furniture, things like that. You want to try and bring those in if at all possible. Stick them in your garage so that they're not they don't become projectiles. And then of course you'll want to turn off your irrigation systems. There's no need to irrigate in the middle of a hurricane, so turn off that irrigation system. It'll help conserve some water and avoid too much pressure on the systems that might be suffering from storm damage. And then the last one I just wanted to say was harvest your garden. We've got peak veggie production going on during hurricane season, so try and save those tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, okra, so forth before that hurricane hits. So those were just a couple tips, kind of like just common sense type things that you might do to prepare your lawn for a hurricane. And I'll throw it back to you, Stephen B.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your expertise, Kimberly. Ginger, what do you do down south? So Ginger is an esteemed colleague from down in Aransas County. Is that right?
That's it.
Excellent.
Place. I'm not sure about esteemed, but I am in Aransas County. And I just wanted to add on something to what Kimberly said. When Hurricane Harvey came, we don't have a garage. We didn't before Hurricane Harvey either. So we didn't have anywhere to put our glass-topped patio table. So I just turned it upside down in the yard so that it would be less likely to be picked up by the wind, and it was fine. don't know if it's because I did that or just because I was lucky, but anyway, I think that helps. What I'm seeing a lot in this heat is some trouble watering potted plants, making sure that the soil actually gets wet. When it gets hot and dry, the soil can dry up and then it's hard to re-wet it often. So you water it and the water just flows through in the easiest spot it can find, often just sort of around the edge of the pot, and the soil doesn't really get wet. So there's a couple different things you can do. One is basically like the, what do you call it? Soak and repeat cycle that was mentioned already. You can add water very slowly over a long time, let it sit for a bit, water it again slowly. Or if the pot is small enough, I like to put it in a bucket of water for an hour or so till the soil gets wet. If it's a large pot, I'll just poke holes in the soil with a screwdriver or something so water can infiltrate a little better. And another thing that you can do is to add just a couple drops of dishwashing liquid to your watering can to that'll help to break the surface tension, especially if you've got something like peat moss, which is super hard to re-wet after it's dried out. So that's what we're doing here. We just had half an inch of rain this morning in about half an hour, but we are very grateful to get that.
Oh, jealous.
We got 6 drops, Ginger.
Oh, wow.
That was Kevin Gibbs, who's in the adjoining county next to Ginger. Hi, Kevin.
Tomorrow's supposed to be our best
Good
chance
morning.
for rain.
Good morning, Stephen B.
Excellent. Well, folks, we've got a couple of questions in the chat box. Some of them are go back to tomatoes. I'm going to try to answer one or two of them rather than revisit them. But if someone else, one of my esteemed colleagues, can start riffing on another topic right now, I'm going to address this question on tomatoes.
Start ripping.
Yeah. You know, do you have a topic that you'd like to cover, Ginger?
Watering was the main watering potted plants. Oh, I didn't mention clay pots. That, of course, clay pots evaporate water out much faster than plastic or glazed ceramic pots. But another thing about clay pots is they can get so dried out that when you do water the soil, it is sucked into the clay. So that's another reason you might need to soak your plants in a bucket of water. Skip, did you already talk about watering new and established trees?
I did, but if you want to
Okay.
add anything to it, that's good.
No, I had some technical trouble this morning, so I didn't get on till late. But I would echo what everybody said about water deep and infrequently. Your plants, your grass, your shrubs, your trees, they will all be much stronger and healthier for it.
I didn't hear you say this, Ginger. You may have, but one thing about containers that summer reminds us is that when you watch gardening shows from all over the country and you see plants in containers, if you're in Texas, just make that container 50% bigger. Because it may be, in Northern California or New Jersey or someplace, you can get by with a little container for a plant. But here we are pumping water out way faster. So the bigger your container, the bigger your bank account of water, and it keeps you from going into stress, which will make tomatoes drop fruit. It'll cause a lot of problems on a lot of plants. And so we would, and we don't want to water them 3 times a day, at least I don't. And so big containers and a good quality soil mix. Ginger mentioned the thing about peat moss being so bad, about having to re-wet it. That's certainly true.
And there's better things to use than peat moss as far as the environment. Things like coconut coir. but have a lot of benefits over peat moss.
Folks, one of our participants did miss the information about cycle and soak. In other words, let's see if I can find it. I missed the first part of the last speaker's words. How many minutes per cycle to water twice a week? One thing that I would, before y'all answer that, I would like to mention that there is a part of extension called the Texas ET network, or evapotranspiration network, and there are calculators online to help to guide a person to how often they should water. It's accumulated information. Here, let me just show you through online really quickly while I'm going there. So
And Stephen, I just posted a preventing runoff with cycle and soak link.
Oh, excellent. Folks, this is Brandi Keller. Brandi is with Harris County Extension. So the Texas ET network is this place where you can go to get information. It's based on real-time information of an estimation of what water has been available to you, an estimation of how you use your water, also based on evapotranspirative rates, an average of those, depending on where you're located. And you can go online to texset.tamu.edu. We'll put that in the chat. Brandi may have put that already in the chat as well, so that at least you can go to this. You select a station that's closest to you. It's a weather station. They have accumulated information that will help to provide that guide to you. You choose the station, and then you start working down from there. We're interested in the calculator that is a landscape calculator that will provide information for us. I'm not prepared to go through this as an exercise, just letting y'all know that there are instructions on how to use this calculator to help guide you on how much you can apply. And then there's documents such as Brandi has provided to us, or links to documents that you can use to help make that determination. Now, back to the original statement. I think it was Skip. You had mentioned on average how much water someone should apply to their landscape.
Yeah, in the heat of summer, an inch a week is a good rule of thumb. The problem with that is it's more wrong than right. So an inch a week in the sun versus the shade cannot be equal. An inch a week in a clay versus a sand cannot be equal. Do you see what I'm saying? And so it's just a general guideline. Can I share? I'm going to also share something, if that's okay, Stephen.
Yes, sir.
I'm on a new computer, and so I don't even know how to turn it on. Well, apparently I do.
Yeah, you must have figured it out.
Well, how do I share my screen?
Share button, and then you can choose a window or an application.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't see it. Let me just see what happens if. All right, instead of that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put something in the chat, and maybe Stephen or somebody can pull it up. It's called watermyyard.org. The ag engineers at A&M have put together a really helpful website that a lot of the water systems in Texas utilize. I know all around the Houston, Galveston area. I don't know, David, if it goes all the way out to Orange, but yeah, if you go to there, you can sign up. And what it does is it uses the data Stephen was telling you about from the ET site, but it finds the nearest little mini weather station to you, and it crunches the numbers all for you. And you even tell it, like, I have a pop-up sprinkler steady on, I've got a rotor, or I've got, in the case of that picture that Stephen or somebody put up, that's a multi-stream rotor at the bottom. And each of those puts water out at different rates. So it makes it even more foolproof, because it'll say, turn that sprinkler on for 30 minutes or water for 30 minutes, even if you have to break that 30 minutes up. But you sign up by email and you get free email or chat tips or whatever telling you, hey, it's time. You can get the app from the App Store or Google Play, Apple App Store or Google Play. Not everybody listening on this call may be in an area that has Water My Yard, but I would suggest that at least 75% of you probably are.
Excellent recommendation, Skip. I actually subscribe to this, and I get a weekly or bi-weekly email shaking its finger at me.
Well, what it's doing for those listening is it's looking in your area at the solar intensity, the wind speed, the humidity, the temperature. It's crunching all of these things into a formula. So it's spitting out what your grass is used for that. So that thing about an inch a week, when we get into April or when we're off in later October, you don't need an inch a week. And so it adjusts accordingly because it's looking at what the grass is using.
Excellent resource. It really does work, folks. It's helped to guide me in how I water my yard and water as a responsible citizen. Remember, it's about conservation of resources as well.
Brandi has a hand up, Stephen.
Oh yes, Brandi.
Yeah, I was just going to fill in if you would like another topic.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I've been getting some questions about snails. They're just super active right now. I mean, with the heat, and so I'm going to post a link that is pretty comprehensive, that just talks about monitoring and prevention. So not letting things lie around that, like wood where they'll accumulate. I've even found them when I'm watering some of the pots that the leaves are closer to the mulch or the top of the soil. And because I looked under the leaves, I saw like a whole nursery. So my trick is I just go like this and I chuck them. I don't know if that's right. It's fun for me. It's part of my therapy too. I like to see how far I can throw them as long as it's like away from wherever they were. But sometimes you find them like a nursery like that, and you can prevent them getting bigger and then consuming more of your plants. And then modifying places that they like, removing by hand, and then even trapping. So I don't know, a few of you may have an opinion about beer, not the drinking, you yourself drinking of the beer. But beer works as a trap, but it also may bring them in. But I mean, essentially, I think it, you gotta try whatever you can try, and if you're in an uphill battle with this, it can definitely be a fun tool, setting beer out. But that link, that's an AgriLife link, it really goes through all the different components. So I just thought and then of course reducing your irrigation will also help with the snail issue too. Anybody have an opinion on the beer bait?
I think there are better uses for beer, but that's just me.
Go cheap beer.
Yeah, so that's all I've got.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brandi. That's very important, especially in our area where we have high snail populations. I lived in Seattle, Washington for a little bit, where the way we resolved it is by eating them. But I'm just kidding.
Escargot.
There you go. Once you go escargot. Another one of our participants had asked a question, and I think I know the answer. I'll describe the question. My canna lilies are suffering from something, not sure if it's a pest or disease. New leaves do not open. This is Stump the Experts. Brown streaks appear on the leaf stalks, contain lots of black dots that look like dirt, and the idea on what this is and how to get rid of it. I've got cannas in my backyard.
Got to watch out for those little things that look like dirt.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably caterpillar droppings.
You know, the cannon leaf roller.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. If the leaves are not opening up, it would definitely be what they call the candle leaf roller. Normally you will see your leaves look kind of distressed. They may have some holes in them, things like that, and they kind of look tattered. Yeah, that's a definite sign of the candle leaf roller, especially during the dry weather. So.
Excellent. And those boogers are difficult to deal with. They have developed their nesting in such a way that, you know, application of some product like that contains BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, is not going to be, you're not going to get good penetration to affect the larvae or the caterpillars. Just a general statement. So Peggy, we're thinking that if you're seeing little dirt-like specks, that's frass, and it's going to be the cannon leaf roller. Mine in the backyard, I have an issue with a disease called canna rust, or rust of canna lily, which is a fungal pathogen, and it's difficult to manage. One of the best ways I manage it, and I get it on my cannas every year, is to handle it culturally, to try to remove some of the leaves that are infected. I don't, as a rule, for my cannas, I just don't take the extra effort to apply a dormant oil to try to prevent that. Fungicides, if you do get canna rust, fungicides are used as a preventative rather than a curative. Right on. So I'm not saying that that's what you're talking about, Peggy. It sounds like what you're talking about is related to an insect rather than to a fungal pathogen. But just to bring an awareness that cannas, while they're beautiful, if you don't have them in the right place, if you don't have good aeration between, with those particular plants, we have challenges with canna rust in our area because of the high humidity that we have. Keep cultivating them. Just be aware that you may get an infestation of a fungal pathogen as well. We have another person who has asked a question, wanting to know what the difference between vermiculite and perlite, and so basically, what are the differences and how do you use them? She hears that there's a mix of two. The mix of two is great at propagation, but which one is best to retain water? So I guess let's go back to the basics. What's the difference between vermiculite and perlite?
Well, perlite is some like pumice. It's a volcanic rock, and vermiculite is expanded mica, I think. Whatever they are, vermiculite holds a lot more water. It does provide some aeration just because the pieces are larger. There's, there is some air available there, but perlite is much better for aeration, and vermiculite for holding moisture. I don't, does anybody know about a mix of the two? I've heard of a mix of vermiculite and I think peat moss for propagation.
I think either's fine. You mentioned some of the plus minus stuff, Ginger. Perlite tends to float up in the mix, so you end up with a lot of little white things on top of the soil. Vermiculite, when it's wet, if you press it at all, like if you're mashing around the soil or something, it tends to collapse. It doesn't hold. It's not like a little rock like perlite is that holds its structural integrity. By the way, I'm in San Antonio today, and I just have to point out, having grown up in South Texas, that perlite is a type of beer that's brewed in San Antonio.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. That's not what she's talking about, though.
I don't think so. But it would attract slugs, Brandi. So.
True.
I love how y'all tie this all in together.
And it's all one big picture.
Gardening is life.
All right.
We need canned laughter, since we don't have laughter from the crowd. I think that would help.
I think you're onto something, Skip. Thank you for that.
So I guess we didn't really really answer the part about, is it recommended to use both, a combination of perlite and vermiculite for propagation, or one or the other? Since I'm reading that, somebody else has to answer it.
Ginger, it's Kevin. I generally use a mixture of perlite, vermiculite, and either peat moss or potting soil if I'm trying to root things. The perlite provides extra drainage, and I have good success with that. But if you're just looking for a potting media, then it's going to be a mixture of probably peat moss, vermiculite, and perlite. Do y'all agree with that?
I'd go for vermiculite, perlite, and potting soil myself.
Me too. I generally don't like peat moss that much, but yeah, I prefer to mix it with potting soil instead of peat moss.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. We have another question. Folks, we're winding up on about 45 minutes into the program. We thank you all very much for joining us today. We know your time is precious, and we love to address as much as we can. Just a reminder that if you, I'm sure you have a horticulture agent near you, or at least an ag agent, if you're in a more rural county, not near an urban center, please reach out to those individuals as well. We may not be able to address everything that we have today. Once we start priming the pump, then we get lots of questions. But if we miss something, go ahead and reach out to those professionals. We're here to help you improve the skills that you already have in gardening and horticulture. For our agents, I'd also like to add one more question that I think is important, and it really does relate to our environmental conditions that we have right now. So individual Tara asks, for container raised bed vegetable gardening, is water soluble fertilizer or slow release fertilizer more effective, or a combo with the climate? She says she's from Ohio. Go Ohio. And recently moved to thank you, Brandi. Recently moved to Aransas Pass, so down around Kevin and Ginger's neck of the beach. But are there any opinions for this question? And
Stephen, I'm looking for the question. Is it in chat?
It is. Tara is a guest. And if you like, I can repeat the question as well.
Please.
Okay.
I don't think we can see it.
For container/raised bed vegetable gardening, is water soluble fertilizer or slow release fertilizer more effective, or a combo with the prevailing climate? And I'm interpreting climate meaning seasonality.
Well, I can lead out on something and you guys add as you wish. I like the slow release, although you pay more for it. And the reason is it gradually releases over time, but not all slow releases are equal. Osmocote, which is probably the most famous slow release that looks like little BBs, the hotter and wetter it gets, the faster it releases. So even though it may say it lasts 4 to 6 months, it's not in the summer here. There are other types of slow release that release gradually. Organic fertilizers naturally or somewhat slow release in that they have to microbially break down in order to release their nutrients. So if you can feed gradually over time, that's okay. If you can take whatever amount of fast release fertilizer you were going to apply and split it into 3 or 4 applications, it's more trouble, but you can gradually feed that way too. But that, if you just put it on at one time, you risk the thing of fertilizer burn if you put too much, and it tends to go away. I like to use the analogy, and this is a little overstated, but anyway, do you eat your whole week's food on Monday and then eat again next Monday? Or do you eat every day? Well, plants every day are taking nutrients up. Now, they don't have to have us to apply every nutrient they need. There's lots in the soil, but they're taking nutrients up every day. So gradually over time is the way we all eat. And that is a simple way to avoid making mistakes. But it comes at a price. Okay, I started so that somebody else could jump in, so.
I'll add what I do, Skip. I tend to use a combination of both. I will apply a slow release fertilizer and then monitor my plants. And probably about every third or fourth watering, I might give them a little shot of water soluble fertilizer to go along with the slow release. But I also want to add, if you've got a good quality soil and plenty of organic matter in there, that there are nutrients that are coming out of that soil and organic matter as well.
There was a question about passion fruit also that I think we might have missed.
I think it was the passion vine because it's probably being consumed by the Gulf fritillary. Is that, or did I read it wrong? I'm not wearing my reading glasses.
Well,
Oh, it is not. It is. You're right. I'm gonna mute.
For it.
Linda asks, how do I know my passion plant fruit is ready to be picked? Question mark. 2 to 3 months? Question mark. How do you know when it's ripe?
The fruit will start to shrivel when it's ripe. Somebody else?
There you
go. Only sign I know.
You're a tropical expert, Ginger. You've been there and done that.
I agree with Ginger. There's going to be the fruit itself will give you a physical sign that it's ready. One is when it starts to attain that full color, and a lot of that is dependent on your experience with the plant. You may be a novice to working with passion fruit, but it'll stop being that bright green and start to fade a little bit as far as the coloration goes. Sometimes the skin will pucker, the rind will pucker a little bit. And I treat this the same way with advice for citrus trees or pear trees. The best way to determine whether on average those are ripe, you're going to have higher production. You're not going to have 1 or 2 fruit. Oftentimes you're going to have more than 15 on a passion vine. Just pull one off and see if it's ready.
And if it's not, put it back.
And if it's not, put it back. Okay. You get a refund on that.
I like that. That's good.
Or at least don't pick anymore.
We should host a roundtable on humor in horticulture. I think we do this quarterly anyway. Well, folks, thank you very much for your time today. Our colleagues, unless y'all have anything else you'd like to provide as advice for our registrants today, participants. All right. Well, we thank you very much for joining us today. This has been Gardening in the Gulf Coast with our colleagues from Brazos County, Skip Richter, Brandi Keller with Harris County, Ginger-Easton Smith, Aransas County, Kimberley Mayer with Brazoria County, David Oates with Jefferson County, Kevin Gibbs with
Nueces
County. I knew it.
Nueces.
Thank you. Stephen Brueggerhoff with Galveston County. We're here to serve you. The next programs that we have, I'm going to share this screen really quickly. Hopefully this works. The next program that we have, another roundtable. We're planning on delivering this in the same format on Teams October the 4th. We'll be bringing timely topics to you, seasonal topics to think about that'll be meaningful for your gardening experience in that particular season. Then we have an additional one to round out the year in December the 6th. We'll be talking amongst ourselves to make sure that we're addressing those kind of topics that we think are meaningful to you, and we're always open to any recommendations or questions that you have about your experience as well. Thank you again for your time. We look forward to serving you, and we'll see you in the garden in about another couple of months. Y'all take care.
Christy, your question came in late, so I just put a link in chat if you didn't notice it. It'll answer more than we could.
And you can always contact your agent. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.